You ever notice how sometimes someone with a really unique background,
Mm.
a really specific set of life experiences, pops up out of nowhere and becomes a major figure in national politics?
Yeah, all the time in American politics. People whose lives you'd never expect to see intersecting with, like, the halls of power.
Exactly. And that's kind of what we're diving into today.
We are.
The potential for J.D. Vance to be vice president, running alongside Donald Trump.
Big potential shift in the landscape, for sure.
Big time. And to really wrap our heads around this, to get at what's really going on under the surface, we got to look at the American cultural landscape itself. Like, where do these figures come from? What's the ground they're standing on?
I like that. The ground they're standing on.
Right. So for that, we're turning to, well, it's an amazing book, J.D. Vance's Hillbilly Elegy.
Oh, great choice.
It's more than just his personal story. It's this incredibly insightful look at the white working class, especially those with Scots-Irish roots, the Rust Belt, right?
Like Appalachian descendants who ended up in the industrial Midwest.
Yeah, exactly. So think of this book as our guide, right? Our key to understanding a big chunk of American voters, and importantly for you listening, how Vance's story might resonate on a national level, given where we are politically.
Makes sense. Hillbilly Elegy is perfect for this deep dive because it's so personal. It gives you this almost granular view of a culture and a set of experiences that honestly get reduced to stereotypes way too often.
It's real. It's raw.
Exactly. So Vance gives us this insider's perspective on class, on identity, on the huge changes that have happened to the white working class over the last few decades. And our mission today, our goal, is to connect these personal stories from the book to the bigger American cultural context, especially as it helps us understand the potential appeal of someone like Trump.
Yeah, and by extension, someone like Vance as his VP.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's start unpacking this. Let's look at Vance himself and the identity he lays out so clearly in the book. He identifies strongly as a white working-class American with Scots-Irish heritage, right?
Yeah, he does, very explicitly.
And he's very clear about not identifying with, like, the traditional WASP identity of the Northeast.
Yeah.
So for you listening right off the bat, that flags a distinction within white American. It's not a monolith.
Not at all. And what's fascinating is how connected he feels to the people he calls hillbillies, rednecks, even white trash.
Those are loaded terms.
They are, and for Vance, these aren't just labels. They're his neighbors, his friends, his family in the Rust Belt. He's drawing a line, highlighting a distinct cultural and historical lineage that sets them apart.
And that lineage is marked by what he calls like a family tradition of poverty.
Generational hardship.
Generations. We're talking ancestors who were day laborers in the South, sharecroppers, coal miners, and then factory workers in the industrial heartland. It's not just a recent recession hitting them. It's this multi-generational thing, right?
Exactly. And that's so key for understanding their worldview. It's not just the economics. It shapes their values, their expectations, everything.
Yeah.
Vance doesn't shy away from the personal cost of this background either. He talks about his own experiences with poverty. He talks about addiction in his family, being raised by his grandparents. And then there are things like the heroin epidemic in his hometown. This stuff is real. He's giving you a glimpse into the lived experience of these communities.
It's visceral, right? You get these vivid details.
Yeah.
And that takes us to this wider economic and cultural crisis that he describes, like the decline of the industrial Midwest, the loss of economic security and stability.
And the impact on families. It's huge. You got to understand this to get where these anxieties come from.
So talk about that. What's he saying?
The loss of manufacturing jobs. It wasn't just about losing a paycheck.
Right.
It was about a whole way of life crumbling. A sense of stability, community, all tied to those factories.
And he illustrates this with, I think it was his time working in a tile warehouse, right?
Yeah, he tells the story about his time there.
What was that like?
Demanding work, low pay. But what's really striking is the behavior he saw in his coworkers. Like this guy, Bob, who got fired and then blamed it on his pregnant girlfriend, not taking responsibility.
So what's the takeaway for us there?
Vance is using that story to say it's not just economics. He's saying economic insecurity matters, but it doesn't explain everything. There's a cultural piece, too.
Ah.
Yeah, a cultural piece that's critical to understanding the struggles he saw.
And that leads to this idea of social decay, which he talks about, right? Like the idea that the dominant culture is now encouraging bad behavior instead of fighting against it.
Enabling it, almost.
That's a pretty heavy statement. Like there's a deeper societal problem going on here beyond just money.
It is a strong statement, and it's a central point in his book.
It is.
The takeaway for you listening is that Vance is arguing that the norms and values that used to help people weather economic hardship have eroded. It's not just about jobs. It's about a shift in the fundamental culture of the community.
Right, right. And then there's this whole question of identity. Vance makes this interesting point about class consciousness and how it connects, or sometimes doesn't connect, with how we usually understand race and ethnicity.
Yeah, super important to unpack that. It challenges some common assumptions about identity in America.
Big time.
He observes that we tend to see identity through the lens of race, right?
We do.
And he says terms like Black people, Asians, white privilege, they can be useful, but they don't always capture the nuances of his own experience.
From his community's experience, right?
Right, of the working class whites he knows. He says there's this ethnic component that goes beyond just being white.
So he's saying, like, being white in this particular cultural and class context is different from, say, being a wealthy white person in Manhattan.
Totally.
It's about the complexity of identity, the limits of broad strokes. And by the way, when we say WASP, we mean the traditional white Anglo-Saxon Protestant establishment, often associated with the Northeast. Right?
Exactly.
Okay, good. Just clarifying. Now, to be clear, Vance isn't saying that working class whites deserve more sympathy than anyone else struggling.
Right.
But he emphasizes that we have to understand class and family dynamics and not just jump to a racial interpretation for everything.
It's more nuanced than that.
Yeah, way more nuanced. And he even talks about knowing plenty of white welfare queens, directly challenging that stereotype.
Which is often racialized.
Yeah. So it's like, who's actually receiving government assistance?
Right. It complicates the picture.
Totally. And he also talks about his own experience navigating different social codes.
Oh, yeah.
Like the contrast between Ohio and Kentucky and feeling like he had to pretend in some environments.
Like code switch.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So for you listening, that really highlights the cultural differences he's pointing out.
It really does. It's about more than geography.
It is.
It's unspoken rules, different expectations, a sense of belonging or not belonging in different social settings. It's deep.
Deep stuff. And then there's this theme of loyalty, which seems huge in his upbringing. He talks about his mama, right?
Mama.
And her views on loyalty, especially this idea of class betrayal. It's fascinating. For you, this gives you a glimpse into the core values of this community.
So fundamental. And that story about her reaction to theft, like being furious about the poor, stealing from the poor, that really captures it.
That's powerful.
It is. There's this feeling of shared struggle, a real disapproval of exploiting anyone in a vulnerable position. And it shows you this strong internal moral code based on not betraying people who share your hardships.
So Vance also talks about how these hillbilly values spread beyond Appalachia, right?
Yeah.
Through migration to the Rust Belt, creating communities like Middle Tucky in Ohio.
Right. And for you listening, that shows the geographic impact of this cultural group. It's not just a small, isolated thing.
So it wasn't just individuals moving for jobs. It was whole communities bringing their values and their culture with them.
Exactly. Middle Tucky is a perfect example. You can see the demographic impact of that migration on the Midwest. It helps explain why certain areas in the Rust Belt have similar cultural traits.
So it wasn't always smooth, this integration, right? He talks about cultural clashes, the stigma faced by these Appalachian migrants, people calling them too big for your britches, disapproval from established white Ohioans about family size or customs.
They were seen as different.
Really different. And that, for you, shows the divisions and prejudices that could exist within a racial group, even among white people.
And there's this quote from Appalachian Odyssey that Vance includes that's really insightful. It talks about how the perceived racialness of hillbillies actually challenged what northern whites thought it meant to be white.
Whoa.
Yeah. It highlights the cultural gap and the stereotypes they faced, even within the white population. Really important point.
It is. Okay, so despite these challenges, there's this strong sense of faith, a commitment to hard work, a belief in the American dream. All things he links back to his mama and papa.
Yeah. Really core values that help them through tough times.
Absolutely. They faced stigma, economic hardship, but they believed in hard work and self-reliance. It's interesting. His papa identified as a Democrat. He saw the party as protecting working people. But Mama was more cynical. She'd say things like, they're all a bunch of crooks.
So you get this glimpse into the complex political views within their community. It wasn't so simple.
Not at all. But they both shared this disdain for, and this is a quote, losers who think the deck is stacked against them. That's telling.
Really telling.
It points to this core belief in personal responsibility, a resistance to the idea of being a victim.
Yeah, that rejection of victimhood, that emphasis on individual agency, even when things are tough, it's all over Vance's story.
Is powerful.
It's this cultural expectation to be tough, to be self-reliant, to not complain.
And Vance doesn't shy away from the harder parts of this culture either, right?
Yeah.
He talks about the fighting and violence within families,
The substance abuse.
the impact on families, the different values around education, around white-collar jobs. These are important for you to grasp.
Absolutely. These are the uncomfortable truths Vance wrestles with in Hillbilly Elegy.
He does. And he tells this story about a math game in first grade. He didn't even understand multiplication.
It shows you the lack of early exposure to certain concepts, which can put you at a disadvantage later on.
And it's not just individual effort, right? He's revealing these systemic challenges within the community.
Right. It's a more complete picture.
And he talks about the limited expectations people had for themselves and for their kids in Middletown.
Yeah, this feeling of being stuck in a cycle.
It's hard to break out. So for you listening, this shows how environment and lack of opportunity can really shape your aspirations.
When you're surrounded by limited possibilities, it can be so hard to even imagine something different.
Let alone achieve it, right?
Exactly.
So now let's talk about politics. Vance observed this big shift in how working-class whites saw the Democratic Party. Growing mistrust fueled by this perception of welfare dependence.
Yeah, this is crucial for understanding the political changes we've seen.
Huge shift.
Vance highlights this growing resentment towards the Democrats, who used to be seen as the party of the working class.
They did.
But there was this sense that government assistance was letting people avoid work, that it wasn't actually helping.
And he tells this story about his neighbor, right, signing up for Section 8 housing. Mama was furious, saw it as a betrayal.
Like going against their shared values.
It's a powerful anecdote. It really encapsulates this political shift. Okay, so let's tie this all together. Back to our main focus, Vance as VP with Trump. How does this background, this cultural context, resonate with the broader American culture, especially in terms of Trump's appeal?
This is where it gets really interesting. A lot of what Vance talks about in Hillbilly Elegy aligns with what resonated with Trump voters. The distrust of institutions, the feeling of being left behind, the conspiracy theories.
The message that it's not your fault, it's the government's fault.
Exactly. It echoes Trump's rhetoric.
So you're saying there's this shared frustration, this disillusionment that Vance describes from his own experience, and Trump tapped into that on a national scale.
Precisely. And it helps explain Trump's success.
Okay.
And then there's the emphasis on loyalty to family and community, a strong sense of identity tied to a specific background, even if it's stigmatized.
And that distrust of elites, the mainstream media, the established.
All of that, it's in Vance's story, and it was central to Trump's appeal.
They both speak to a group of people who feel ignored, misunderstood.
Exactly.
So Vance's personal story, rooted in the white working class, gives us this important cultural context for understanding why a Trump-Vance ticket might appeal to a lot of voters.
It's about understanding the cultural forces at play.
Okay, so to wrap up this deep dive, what are the key takeaways for you listening?
J.D. Vance's Hillbilly Elegy is a powerful look at what's shaped the white working class.
It's personal.
It is, and it highlights themes of identity, class struggles, political shifts, and the importance of community and loyalty.
And for you listening, understanding Vance's background, where he comes from, what he's seen, helps you see why he might connect with a lot of voters.
And it helps you understand the dynamics of a potential Trump-Vance ticket.
So as you think about all this, consider this.
Yeah.
How do these personal stories, these cultural values that Vance describes, intersect with the bigger trends in America today?
And what does it mean for our national identity, our politics, when these specific cultural experiences take center stage?
It's something to think about.
It is. A lot to unpack there.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure.